Ninth Doctor claimed to only take the best. So how do you explain some of the naff companions that have travelled in the TARDIS over the years? From Ian and Barbara to Sarah Jane Smith and Donna, the Doctor's had a fairly good hit rate over the years. But sometimes they miss. Big time. I'm Ellie for Who Culture here with the 10 worst Doctor Who companions ever. Number 10, Ryan Sinclair. Anyone who's seen Supercell on Netflix will know what a phenomenal lead actor Tosin Cole can be. But unfortunately, the role of Ryan Sinclair rarely gave him chances to tap into that frontman energy. In a stacked TARDIS crew, Ryan often felt surplus to requirements, particularly once Chris Chibnall recognised the chemistry between Jodie Whittaker and Mandip Gill. Ryan has a decent arc in his first series as he comes to terms with the death of his grandmother and makes peace with both Graham and his father. The problem is that there wasn't anywhere else to take him in the next series, with the Timeless Child revelations, the Master, and Yaz and the 13th Doctor's relationship taking up most of the real estate. Tosin Cole's decision to underplay him, assumedly because the character is written as slightly awkward and reserved, does him no favours either, as it meant he often faded into the background against more magnetic performers like Jodie Whittaker and Bradley Walsh. If we'd said goodbye to Ryan and Graham at the end of Series 11, then it's possible we may have thought more fondly of him in the years since. But either way, it's a character that barely registers in the memory, and that's quite sad. Number 9, Susan Foreman. Now, I heard those gasps, but just hear me out, okay? The unearthly child who started it all, Susan Foreman never lived up to her full potential as a character. Her tendency to start screaming at the slightest provocation is mind-boggling when you consider that she's from an alien world and holds knowledge far beyond her years. It's almost as if the writers forgot that she's the granddaughter of a mysterious alien time traveller, and instead wrote her as a whimpering teenager who's always in need of rescuing and then eventually gets married off. It's disappointing, particularly as the characterization of Barbara is generally much more progressive. And even Carol Ann Ford has lamented Susan's writing in the years since, explaining that, quote, "It had become so repetitive. For a large part of the time, Susan was arriving somewhere with her grandfather and the other two, being told not to get into danger, having them come and get her out of danger, then flying off again." Susan's character was so ill-defined in the 1960s that when she finally returned in The Five Doctors, she immediately twisted her ankle and had to stay in the TARDIS and watch the action unfold. Well, as he keeps teasing her return, let's just hope that Russell T Davies has a much better handle on her character than his predecessors. Number 8, Adric. Although many point the finger at the young maths whiz, Adric isn't even the worst Doctor Who companion of the 1980s. He is still bad though, and yet if you watch The Keeper of Traken or Logopolis, you can see the potential of the character. Yes, he's an arrogant boy genius, the Wesley Crusher to Tom Baker's Jean-Luc Picard, but there's an interesting professor and pupil dynamic there that is completely destroyed when the 5th Doctor comes in. It's as if Adric was okay to follow the orders of an elder, but once his mentor turned into a younger man, he threw a hissy fit that lasted almost an entire season of Doctor Who. Adric's tendency to side with villains like he does in Four to Doomsday and Kinder is often born out of a misguided desire to help. However, at worst, it comes across as duplicitous, and at best, it comes across as patronising towards the 5th Doctor. Adric and the 5th Doctor's constant arguing is grating to the extreme as well. So it's no surprise that his death was welcomed with open arms by many corners of Doctor Who fandom. Adric being plastered across the surface of prehistoric Earth certainly beat keeping him in the TARDIS, or so some people might think. Number 7, Katarina. Doctor Who would go on to have huge success with a historical companion when it cast Fraser Hines as Jamie McCrimmon in 1966. But the show's first attempt proved to be a steep learning curve. First introduced in The Mythmakers, Katarina was a handmaiden from ancient Greece, whose primitive frame of reference provided all sorts of headaches for the writers. How was she supposed to react to the events of Terry Nation's epic space opera The Daleks' Master Plan when she didn't even know what a light bulb was? And how many weeks could they sustain the central idea that Katarina believed that the Doctor was some kind of god? Katarina was such a bad idea for a Doctor Who companion that she was swiftly killed off by producer John Wiles and script editor Donald Tosh 4 weeks into her first proper serial. Still, as poorly realised a character as she was, she really didn't deserve to be held at knife point, then ejected into the vacuum of space. Number 6, Lady Christina de Souza. Lady Christina is what happens when you order River Song from Poundland or Temu. Whether it's the writing or Michelle Ryan's performance, it's hard to say, but she just doesn't have the charisma that allows us to overlook her dubious morals in the way we do with River. Russell T Davies's first era of Doctor Who is full of relatable companions. Rose Tyler is the bored shop worker who dreams of something bigger. Martha Jones is a medical student struggling to balance her studies with her fractured family dynamics. And Donna Noble is the office temp whose lack of self-esteem prevents her from dreaming big. All of these companions are people we know in our daily lives. Lady Christina, on the other hand, is a bored rich girl who steals priceless artifacts for kicks and a good chunk of profit. When you put it like that, she just sounds like a Ferengi. Given that Planet of the Dead also aired in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, Lady Christina's background and motivations feel even more crass than they would normally be. She doesn't even do anything that heroic to get us on her side either. When she sacrifices a big fancy golden cup, which she stole, to get everyone home, are we supposed to cheer? It's hardly punting Matt's Capricorn into a fiery grave with a forklift truck now, is it? Number 5. Victoria Waterfield. Victoria Waterfield appears in some of the most iconic Doctor Who serials of the 1960s, but their icon status isn't built by the strength of her character, that's for sure. Introduced as a literal damsel in distress in Evil of the Daleks, Victoria never really graduates from this role in her time travelling with the Second Doctor and Jamie. Deborah Watling is an incredibly charming presence in interviews and convention footage, so it is disappointing that this charisma rarely shines through on screen. The chemistry between Watling and Fraser Hines is also magical, but Doctor Who gets cold feet about making anything interesting out of it. There are occasional flashes of brilliance, however, as shown when she seems more than capable of handling herself in The Enemy of the World, but in stories like Tomb of the Cybermen or The Ice Warriors, all that's required of her is to look scared and scream the house down. Hell, the story that serves as the ending of Victoria's arc, Fury from the Deep, has her save the day with her biggest and most powerful scream yet. I mean, doesn't that just say it all? Number 4. Vislor Turlough. Even when he's not trying to brain the Doctor with a boulder, Turlough is a snivelling coward. Quite what the Black Guardian saw in this pampered private schoolboy is anyone's guess, because he clearly didn't have the stomach for murder. It was certainly a bold idea to introduce an evil Doctor Who companion at the start of season 20, but the problem is that they cast an actor who didn't have the range to give us a complex and compelling anti-hero. Instead, we get a lot of anguish, a lot of snot, and no jeopardy whatsoever. You never believe that Turlough is ever seriously considering how to kill the Doctor, nor that he's actually capable of doing it. And then once this initial Black Guardian arc is resolved, Turlough gets a bit lost in the mix. He gets thrown in jail in The King's Demons, plays a nurse to Susan in The Five Doctors, and then he's back to his old tricks in Warriors of the Deep when he leaves the Doctor to drown in some hilariously shallow water. Frontios and Planet of Fire do give us some insights into Turlough's people and their history, but at that point it's too little too late. The concept of an evil companion is a good one though, and is definitely worth revisiting in the future, so if you're listening RTD, just putting that out there. Number 3. Dodo Chaplet. Despite being from somewhere up north, or London, depending on what accent Mancunian actress Jackie Lane was asked to do that week, Dodo Chaplet was somehow even less defined than Katarina. Audiences at least knew where Katarina had come from because they'd spent 4 weeks in ancient Greece. On the other hand, Dodo accidentally steps inside the TARDIS in the closing moments of the massacre, heavily hinted to be a descendant of 16th century servant Anne Chaplet. Dodo is purely there to make Stephen feel slightly better about leaving Anne behind to endure the devastating St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. The other problem is that nobody knows what to do next, so Dodo never feels at home on the TARDIS. Unlike Susan or Vicky, she doesn't have a particularly warm relationship with the First Doctor either, who just lectures her on her diction and use of 20th century slang. Dodo doesn't even have a particularly good dynamic with fellow companion Stephen, effectively becoming his slightly annoying and antagonistic younger sister. It's hardly surprising that when the Doctor and Dodo return to 1960s London, she's unceremoniously dispatched by phone call and 2 far more believable 60s youngsters come aboard the TARDIS instead. Number 2. Adam Mitchell. Adric and Turlough are in the nursery when it comes to the Ninth Doctor's failed companion, Adam Mitchell. Adric was the only victim of his own arrogance, but Adam almost took down the Doctor and Rose when he sought to pilfer some future technology for his own ends. This cavalier approach to their safety and to the rules of time travel also makes him a far more dangerous anti-companion than Turlough ever was. But are we surprised? Of course Adam was going to turn out to be an absolute moron. He was working for an evil billionaire who was so powerful that he could choose who the next American president was. So clearly, Adam didn't exactly have the strongest of moral compasses to begin with. The fact that he spectacularly fails the test on his very first go in the TARDIS makes him the absolute worst Doctor Who companion ever. Well, almost. We do have one more to go. He proves himself to be so bad that even the Doctor, a man who once invited his would-be murderer to travel with him and always looks for the good in people, doesn't see the potential to give him a second chance. That's when you know you've really messed up. Number 1. Kamelion. Producer John Nathan Turner was always keen to innovate in his early days of Doctor Who. A more up-to-date electronic theme tune and score? Check. A more advanced robot companion than K9? Not quite. Introduced in The King's Demons, the shape-changing robot Kamelion was welcomed into the TARDIS and travelled with the Doctor, Tegan and Turlough for a whole season. The only problem was, he never left his room. Granted, there are some tragic behind-the-scenes reasons for this, as Kamelion's software designer Mike Power died in a boating accident before committing the operating instructions to pen and paper. But just in general, the character was an absolute wet blanket. And so Kamelion was left in a TARDIS cupboard to gather dust and eventually betrays the Doctor and Turlough in Planet of Fire. But hang on a second, Kamelion was a shape-shifting android for goodness sake, so surely they could have just cast an actor to play the robot in human form. Clearly, nobody had faith in the character, and if they couldn't be bothered to make him work, then why should we accept him as anything other than the worst companion to ever enter the TARDIS? And that concludes our list, but I want to hear in the comments down below who your least favourite companions are. But before you even start typing, let's all remember to be kind. It's okay to have different opinions and different views on certain characters and storylines, just so long as we are kind to each other about it. In the meantime, I've been Ellie for Who Culture, and in the words of River Song herself, goodbye, sweeties.